All righty, folks, a good evening. The time has finally arrived. AP Human Geography exam time. And the biggest, the baddest, the toughest, meanest review session of them all is happening right now. And that is the huge AP HuGe, get the play on words there, review session is happening right now, and that is why you all are live. A couple quick reminders before we get started. If you do have any questions, the more questions you have, the better this is going to be for all of us. That way we can all get some really good questions, some really good information there. So the more questions you have, the better we have. If you want to ask a question, you can go ahead and go on to the Google Doc that we have available. So we have that, already got some questions in there, which is all good. All these links can be found on Blackboard, so that's always good. If you want, you can use the Twitter hashtag AP HuGe, Swain AP HuGe review. So you can do that as well. So a whole bunch of ways that you can review for us today. So this is where we be for the next little bit of time that we have together. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started on all of the questions that we have on our various formats. So here we go. I'm going to start off with the Google Doc because that's the first thing I'm looking at right now. So we will start there. Question number one deals with can you give a brief reminder of Weber's least cost theory? Absolutely. Weber's least cost theory is the idea in our industry unit, the idea that whatever you have in terms of a product, you want to move the least distance, what is the heaviest. So I'll give you an example. This desk that you hear me pounding on right now that I am not, that you can't actually see, but this desk that I'm pounding at right now, this desk came from the forest. Now, how does that deal with Weber's least cost theory? Because Weber's least cost theory deals with the finished product, it deals with the input, it deals with the raw materials, and it deals with the labor costs. So it looks at all three of those. Think of it like a triangle. It's looking at all three of those. And what Weber says is, whatever is the heaviest, you want to move the shortest distance. And that, I mean, makes complete sense. So if you think about it from a perspective of this desk that I'm sitting at right here, this desk is heavy, sure, but it's not nearly as heavy as the tree that went to make this desk. So I want to move this desk as little as possible when it is a tree. So what I'm going to do, if I'm a business person, is I'm going to put my production desk plant as close to the trees as possible. Give me a way you can apply this using your noggin here. North Carolina actually has a huge, huge furniture making business, furniture making region. Why? Because it goes back to when the Appalachian Mountains had all those trees, and you would just go, if you were a furniture maker, go to the Appalachian Mountains, come back to your little shop, make whatever it is you're going to make, and then boom, you got your desk, you got your chair, your couch, whatever it is. So that North Carolina furniture maker wanted to move that couch, that chair, that whatever further when it was a finished product rather than when it was the big tree that I had to take out of the wood. So Weber's least cost theory, whatever is the heaviest, you want to move the least. Now, go in the opposite direction. We have something like a Coca-Cola bottle. Now, I have a glass of iced tea over here. This iced tea, I want to use in terms of moving it, I want to move it a short distance. because iced tea is heavier when it is filled in a bottle. When it's filled in a bottle, it's heavier than just the tea and the jugs of iced tea, or the blank jugs there. So you want to move the iced tea jugs, your Arizona iced tea jugs, you want to move those a shorter distance because they are heavier filled than they are empty. That is Weber's least cost theory. Bottom line, whatever is heaviest, you move the least. And that is Weber's least cost theory. And you're looking at all sorts of things. You're looking at transportation costs. You're looking at labor costs. You're looking at agglomeration, all those things. That's what you're looking at for Weber's least cost theory. So a great question, allows us to explain a lot of stuff. We talked about this if you were with us today in class during our Learning Seminar 1. We talked about how you look at Silicon Valley, and that's a great example of Weber's least cost theory as well, because you have businesses that are already there. So they're going to be setting up in all those technology industries are going to set up in Silicon Valley because there's other industries like it that are there. That's called agglomeration. So we talked about that in class today. Another one on the AP exam, I forget what year it is. I want to say maybe it's 2009, 2010. There's a Weber's least cost theory question about corn and how corn and ethanol, and why are there so many corn production plants located, or ethanol production plants located close to where the corn is? Well, because you want to move that corn as least as possible, as short of a distance as possible. So go ahead and check that out as well, whoever asked that question on Weber's least cost theory. So a very, very good question. So we will go back to our Google Docs here, see what the next question is. Question number 2, what are the models we need to know? Can you go over them? Holy moly. There's a lot of models, folks, that you need to know. Let me go over them kind of group by group, if you will, time by time, chapter by chapter, unit by unit. So if we're starting off with our first unit, our geography and its perspective, we didn't really have a model that unit. We didn't really have kind of any major theory that unit. The closest thing we talked about was a globalization idea. The other thing we talked about a lot in unit 1 with our geography and its perspectives unit was we talked a lot about the idea of maps and thematic maps, our isoline maps, like the weather maps, our dot maps, where we're putting one dot where each occurrence occurs. We were talking about the proportional maps, where the bigger something is on the map, the greater that event occurs. And we also talked about the choropleth map, where you have like a state, for example, in terms of voting. We keep on going back to that one because it's a good visual with election season coming up, that you have the darker red, the more Republican, the darker blue, the more Democrat, the more purple, the more even. So it's that idea of the graduated color. That's our choropleth map. Now, when we're talking about chapter 1, we also talk about globalization and the core periphery model. Now, the core periphery model makes an appearance in development and industry again, but when we're looking at the core periphery model, what we're looking at is that the idea here is that there is a well-developed core, and then on the outside, I'll use my little handy-dandy globe, a little squish ball over here. So the idea here is that there's a well-developed core, and the well-developed core is, oh my gosh, this is kind of reversed because of all this. But the well-developed core here starts off with North America, Canada, right? And so it's this core, and then on the outside is the periphery. So the idea with the core periphery model is that there's a well-developed core somewhere, and then outside of that core, you have a lesser developed periphery. Now, if you think about it on a local scale, think about Virginia. Virginia is a core from a Northern Virginia. So if you look at Virginia, Northern Virginia is the core of Virginia. The vast majority of money that comes into Virginia is made in Northern Virginia. So Northern Virginia would be our core. And then our periphery, or our less developed areas, would be the rural areas of the western part of Virginia and the southern part of Virginia. So that's an example of the core periphery model on a more local level. If you want to think about it on a country level, our core is that megalopolis that we talked about, from Boston all the way down to Richmond, the Newport News area. And that's our core. That's where the vast majority of our money in America is. And then as we spread out, it gradually gets less and less. We're talking about a world perspective. It's the northern hemisphere, that's the core. Europe, Canada, Mexico, US, Canada, Europe. That's your well-developed core. And then as you get away from that core, you gradually get less developed. So you're going to the Middle East and then Sub-Saharan Africa, or you're going to Mexico and then Latin America. So there's this gradual tapering off. And that, of course, is the idea of the core periphery model. Second chapter, population migration. Our big idea of population and migration is the demographic transition model. Of course, demographic transition model, we spent an enormous amount of time on. We talked about stage one with our high birth rates. In stage one, we also have our very high death rates. They're fluctuating, they're going up and down. Then we have stage two, when you have a medical revolution or a medical advancement, and that death rate goes whoop, drops down, but your birth rate is still high. What does that mean? Your natural increase rate goes up like a rocket. You're going immensely, immensely high and fast. And you want to get out of that second stage as quickly as possible, because the longer in the second stage, the longer you're going to have to deal with population issues. Stage three is when you developed more of a urbanized society. You don't need as many kids. You don't need as many people because you're not on the farm. You're working in the cities. You're working in factories. Kids start to become a little bit of a more of a liability, a financial burden, if you will. So the death rate continues to go down, but our birth rate starts to go down as well in stage three. Then we get to stage four, where women become more valued in society. Women are working more in society, and our birth rates are again fluctuating, but they are low, and our death rates are low. So if you're looking for a definition of demographic transition, it's the idea that your society is transitioning from high crude birth and death rates with a low natural increase to a stage of low crude birth and death rates with a low natural increase. What happens in between those, you have a really high in stage two natural increase rate, then you have a kind of a leveling off in stage three, and then stage four, your natural increase rate starts to drop again. Stage five is when your death rates creep a little bit above your birth rates, not because more people are dying, but because less people are being born, and that's going to eventually drop off your population. Now, we also talked about in that time frame the population pyramids. Remember, population pyramids are snapshots. They are little snapshots of where your country is at a particular time. So if I give you a snapshot of a country, a population pyramid that shows a big fat base, I almost feel like I'm doing deco. If you have a big fat base like that, that's going to be a stage two country. You're going to have a country in stage two that is going to be a very, very wide pyramid, right? But then you start to kind of narrow out a little bit. You start to narrow out a little bit in your stage three, and by the time you get to stage four, it goes from this two to kind of this three to kind of this four, where it's very even birth and death rates. And then in stage five, you can kind of go a little bit like this. So you have an almost an upside down pyramid. So very, very imperative, those population pyramids, because they're a snapshot at a particular time. But they do a good job because you can see where your country is going at that point in time. So that is your population and migration. That was your kind of big theory about that. We also talked about the migration theories there. The idea that in stage two countries, people are going to be migrating out. There's no jobs. There's this massive population growth. There's only so many jobs available. So people will head on out. They'll hit the road. Where are they going to go? They're going to go to stage four countries. Remember those countries I talked about that need immigrants because we don't have enough workers to work because our population rates are low? That's where stage two countries go. So that's why America has immigrants that are coming from Latin America and Asia. They're stage two countries. We're a stage four country. So they need their people come over here for jobs because we don't have as many jobs as we would, or we don't have as many people for the jobs as we have openings for. Also in stage four, or stage two to stage three, you're noticing movement to the cities. Stage three to stage four, you're moving out of the cities. Stage four, you're continuing this kind of suburbanization process as well, excuse me. So when you're talking about that, those are your theories. Our last theory that we talked about was the Ravenstein's theory of migration. And Ravenstein's theory of migration is if you are a single male, you are more likely to move further than if you are a family or if you are a female with children. Why? Because long distance moves are tough. They take a long time to set up. And usually it's a single male that's going to start it off and then save up enough money to gradually bring over their family. So that's with that. That's 2 and 3. For our folk culture, pop culture, religion, language, ethnicity, we really didn't have a model. We really didn't have a theory, if you will. So there's really nothing kind of really to talk about there. Political geography for 8 was those state shapes, not really a model, but those state shapes, compact, remember, either kind of circular and round or kind of square, where kind of everyone's thing kind of equal in the middle. It's very easy to get to one spot to the other. We also talked about the fragmented states, where you are broken up either by a natural barrier like water or another country trying to get resources. Our third one we talked about with that was the prorupt state, or the state with a tail, where it's trying to get an access to resources. Prorupt T with a tail. We talked about the elongated, very long and narrow, like Chile, for example, great example of an elongated state. Very, very long and narrow, makes communication very difficult. And we also talked about a perforated state, or that state that completely surrounds another state. Very few of those in the world. Unit 9, the big theory there is the Rostow model of development, or what we call the Labrostow model. The Labrostow model is the idea, the Rostow model is the idea that if you want to develop as a country, if you want to be good, you need to find what you do better than everybody else. And that is called comparative advantage. Think about it. LeBron James is not a well-rounded individual. Peyton Manning, not a well-rounded individual. These people are people that are good at one thing. They honed their skills, and they either shot the rock like LeBron, or they threw the touchdown pass like Peyton Manning, but they're not well-rounded people. The Rostow model says don't be a well-rounded country. Find what you do that's better than everybody else's, and use that to your advantage. Then you get all the money because you're doing something better. You're then using it to develop other areas of your economy and make your country better. That's the Labrostow model. So the next time your guidance counselor, your parents say, Mom, you need to be a well-rounded individual. No. I'm going the Rostow way, or the Labrostow way, if you will. So that is the Rostow model of development. There's another model of where people can get developed, and that's a self-sufficiency approach. The idea that you are going to kind of be a well-rounded country and set up various sectors and do very, very well. Takes a long time, lots of corruption possible, not good. Agriculture was the von Thunen model. Chapter 10, agriculture, the von Thunen model. The idea that outside of a city, you have rings of agriculture. The first ring is your dairy ring and is your intensive agriculture. You need to be close to the center of the city because it's a perishable good. Milk, the milk shed. My milk shed brings all the boys to the yard. We also talk about intensive agriculture being close because it's very, very profitable land. Remember, that land outside the city is super expensive. So you need to have a agricultural system that is going to make you enough money to be close to that city to pay those high areas of rent. Next in von Thunen, you have the forestry ring, or the ring where there's lots of trees. So you have the dairy intensive one, and then you have the forest ring. Why? Goes back to kind of the Webers, but instead of industrial location, it's the idea of you don't want to move trees very far. They're very big, they're very heavy, not good. Then you have the next ring is your extensive agriculture. This is your area that is very big because you have crops that need a lot of space to grow. Also, you can grow a lot of crops. Why is it so far out? Because there's land cheaper out the further you go. The further you go, the cheaper the land is. Land is more expensive outside of DC and Arlington than it is in Manassas. So when you're talking about land, you're talking about finding land as cheap as possible in order to make sure that you're making as much money as possible. So when you're talking about the land in the third ring, that is extensive agriculture. Plus, it's okay that you have extensive agriculture that far because your extensive agriculture like wheat and corn, they don't perish very quickly. They take a while to perish. So it's okay that they're that far out. And our last ring, of course, is our ranching ring. That's far out because that's the furthest away from the city. Land is the cheapest. Animals can graze out there and they can transport themselves into the city in order to get slaughtered. So it's your dairy intensive, followed by your forest, followed by your extensive, followed by your ranching. And that is the von Thunen model. Lots of issues with the von Thunen model. It assumes equal soil, no natural features, equal climate, all that type of stuff. Bottom line is the von Thunen model today, we apply on a continental level or a country level. We don't have it in our little cities today. We have better refrigeration, better transportation routes, all those things that help that work out a lot better. Chapter 11, what we talked about was Weber's least cost theory with industry. And then we get to our cities and urban land use, our chapters 12 and 13. And cities and urban land use, we have a couple things I want to talk about here. Number one is the central place theory. The central place theory is the idea that you are going to have an area where you have a majority of people living and services. And then outside of that area, outside of that central business district, if you will, there's going to be smaller areas. And those areas need services, but they don't need as many services or as much services. Key to the central place theory is the idea of range and threshold. Threshold is how far people are willing to travel in order, brain fart. Range is how far people are willing to travel to get to your good or service. And threshold is how many people need to support your good or service. So let's think about it. McDonald's. You're not going to travel that far to go to McDonald's. It's fast food. It's not great food. You're not traveling huge distances to go. So there's many McDonald's in a short distance. Think about Springfield, where we're at. There are probably, I can think of right now off the top of my head, there are 3 McDonald's in about a 4-mile radius from one another. There's a McDonald's right by the school, McDonald's kind of up by where that cheap gas station is, and McDonald's kind of down by where the Springfield Mall is. That's 3 McDonald's within like a 4-mile radius. That is a very low threshold. You don't want to drive that far. Now, what about Chipotle? Chipotle, you might want to travel a little bit far, because Chipotle, you're kind of, getting a little bit better food, maybe get some E. coli, but you're going to travel a little bit further. So those are spaced out a little bit further than that. How about a really nice seafood restaurant that's going to have some great stuff? You'd be willing to travel long distance for that. And that is your range. How far are you willing to travel? We talked about range in terms of a school. Think about your elementary school. Your elementary school is right around the corner from where you live. You could walk to it every day, like 3 or 4 blocks, 5, 6 blocks. Maybe you had to cross a couple streets, but for the most part, you never crossed a main street. Small little area. Middle school, you had to travel a little bit further than that. Maybe cross Old Keene Mill Road, go on your bike. That's a further commute. The high school, whoa, that's very far for some of you. So when you think about it in terms of there's many elementary schools because there's a small amount of people in the elementary school and it's a very small distance. Middle school, a little bit bigger, people come a little bit further. High school, people come a little bit further than that, and there's more, and then expand it out the most and talk about George Mason University right up the road. That takes a lot more people, and people come from all over the state to go there. That's what we call the central place theory. The idea that there is a different hierarchy of services with how far you're willing to travel, how many people need to support it. McDonald's takes a lot less people to support it than a hospital does. So there's fewer hospitals, there's more McDonald's. Boom, there you go. This leads us then next to our idea of the cities. Thank you. Yeah, cities. The cities are your couple theories there. We have the Burgess concentric zone model. very similar to von Thunen. We have the Hoyt sector model, and we have the Ullmann multiple nuclei model. Now, what's the dealio with that? Well, here, let me tell you. The Burgess concentric zone model is very much like von Thunen in the sense that there's a series of rings. Burgess said the city, if you look at it from an aerial view, it's very much a series of rings. That you have the central business district downtown, then outside of that, you have a zone of transition. Then you might have a less well-off people. Then you have your middle-class people, and then you have your upper-class people. That's going to be seen a lot in your old countries. That's going to be seen in your European countries, where cities were organized around churches or city squares or so on and so forth. They have an area they're organized around. The Hoyt sector model, that's for your Latin American cities, because what Hoyt said is, no, it's not the concentric zone. It's instead sectors, that if you look at cities, there's a series of sectors that you develop in. You have a zone of industry, a zone of very wealthy people, a zone of very poor people. The Hoyt sector model says that people of various incomes are going to be in a sector of it. This is in your Latin American areas because you had a zone of privilege, a zone of non-privilege, and then you have that transportation zone to get goods in and out. Finally, we have the multiple nuclei model, which Ullmann says, you know what? You guys are both wrong. Here's what the Ullmann multiple nuclei model is all about. Cities are not just one area anymore. There's not just one central business district. There's a lot of central business districts. Airports are not in the middle of downtown anymore. So if you're an airport industry, if you are a UPS, for example, you're not going to locate downtown. You're going to locate where the airport is. The stadium is not going to be downtown. It might be in the northern part, which means a lot of bars and restaurants will be up by where the stadium is. Those ideas of the city being not just one central area, but being a hub for multiple things is what we call the multiple nuclei model. Wow. That is a lot of models that we talk about. And you know what I want to leave with the impression of? Much like we talked about at the beginning of the year. The males and females you see on all the magazines, on all the Twitters, on all the Snapchats, and all the Facebooks. Guess what, folks? They're not perfect. They're not perfect. They're just like the rest of us. And models, our AP Human Geography models, they're not perfect either. They're just theories. And that's where we are. Now, that is a boatload of information. So whoever asked that question, you got Mr. Swain for a lot, and you got a lot of information. I sure hope you appreciated that, because that was a whole heck of a lot of information. We're on now question number, believe it or not, 3. So let me get where we're at over here. There were so many. I got to make sure we are where we are here. All right. Question number 3. Let's take a look at it. What last name should we know for the models and such? Hopefully I answered enough of those questions for you about what you had in terms of the last names. All of the last names are good for the models. We talked about Ravenstein with the theory of migration. We talked about all the people with the models. The only one I didn't talk about that you might want to know about is Carl Sawyer, who had the theory about the idea of he had the theory about the idea of how planting came to be, how agriculture came to be. And what he said was that agriculture came to be because of vegetative planting and seed planting. Vegetative, people were kind of just slashing away, and they came back later and saw, oh, hey, look, we cut that thing down and now it's growing. And then seed agriculture, where you got some seeds, you threw it down, it got watered, and boom, there's your plants. That's Carl Sawyer. A lot of the other stuff we kind of talked about already, so that's good to go. Question number 4, what are the major ideas from each unit? I think we covered that, so we'll move on. Question number 5, what are the types of agriculture? A good question. So there are 2 main types of agriculture. There are agriculture that is commercial and agriculture that is subsistence. Agriculture that is commercial is agriculture that you are farming in order to make money. So these are things like dairy. You're going to eat dairy, but you're also selling dairy as well. Extensive commercial crops like wheat, corn, soy, those types of things. Livestock and mixed crop, where you are raising some livestock for profit and you're raising some of the mixed crop to feed the livestock, or maybe some of it to have a year-round idea. Plantation agriculture is a type of agriculture that is in more developed countries in the sense that that's where the base is, but where the actual product comes about, that's in your less developed countries. Plantation agriculture practiced in less developed countries, but financed by the more developed countries. In terms of your subsistence agriculture or farming for survival, we have a couple of those types. We have the slash and burn and shifting cultivation. Shifting cultivation takes up a lot of land because you are slashing down the forest, you are letting it fallow, letting it get nutrients, and then you are growing your crops there and then shifting the crop. So you rest, plant, plant, rest, plant, plant, rest, plant, plant. Those ideas of agriculture, shifting cultivation, takes up a lot of land, and there's not a lot of people who are using that land. Next, we have pastoral nomadism, which is found in the dry lands of Asia primarily. The pastoral nomadism is when you are essentially herding animals. You're herding, you're doing a transhumance, a seasonal migration with the animals, and then sending them off to market in order to kind of survive. And that was that. And then by far the most popular form of agriculture is something called subsistence intensive or intensive subsistence agriculture. What is that? Farming for survival. This is how most people make their living when they're farming for survival. They are literally farming to survive. They are getting up, working on their rice farm in Asia, getting their rice and surviving. That's subsistence agriculture, very popular in Asia. So there you go with that. Are there differences in ranching practices in different regions of or in LDCs, MDCs? So ranching practices are two ways. In more developed countries, ranching is going kind of the way of the dodo, because now we're doing things like feedlots where animals are kept in very specific areas. We're also doing ranching in terms of getting rid of it because we're using irrigation to help that out. Now, when we talk about ranching in more developed countries, it's a commercial thing. In less developed countries, there's not really ranching because you don't have the money to buy the land to keep the animals where they are. So instead, you're doing pastoral nomadism, where you're literally following the animals around. So the difference between ranching and pastoral nomadism is ranching, they're kept in an area, and pastoral nomadism, you're literally just kind of following them around. So very, very different forms. Do we need to know the different types of map projections? A good question. You should be familiar with a couple of them. Number one, the Mercator one, which we talked about very early in the year. That's one where it shows Greenland is huge, much bigger than it really is. And it shows like Latin America, really, really, really small. South America, really, really small. The Mercator projection is something that you should know. You should also know the Robinson equal area projection, because that's what most of those projections are today. If you take a look in your textbook, they have that. I think the AP site has some good stuff on that as well. All right, question number 8. What are the different mapping technologies and what are they used for? So the mapping technologies that are out there, we talked about them during chapter 1. There's 3 major ones we talked about. We talked about remote sensing. We talked about GIS. We talked about GPS. GPS is the easiest one because you guys use it all the time. You use it on the good old iPhones, right? You use it all the time with your GPS. GPS is what people use to find where they're going. It's a triangulation point. So if I'm trying to find out where I'm going, I am going to be moving in a car, obviously. The satellite is also moving, but the place I'm going to, hopefully, is not moving. So they're going to triangulate where the place is with the satellite, where I am, and boom, that's GPS to find out where you go. Everybody knows about GPS today. Now, GIS is a little more confusing. GIS is something called the Geographic Information System. Think of it like a big computer system, because that's what it is. Now, here's what GIS is. Let's say I want to find out where I am going to. Let's say I'm going to take a trip to see Herbert Hoover and his presidential gravesite. If I want to go to see Herbert Hoover, I'm going to just type in Google, Herbert Hoover from Mr. Swain's undisclosed location bunker. Now, here's the problem. Mr. Swain, the GPS. No, it's not. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a series of layers to the map when I Google it. I'm going to see what's the traffic like. I'm going to see what national parks might I go through and stop and camp for a little bit. I might see, hey, what are some nearby attractions? When I can turn on and off layers, like where the traffic is, where the parks are, where the interesting theories are, that is GIS. When you can turn on and off layers, maybe I want to see what the weather is going to be like, and it'll put some radar on there as well. That's GIS. Think of it like a layer cake, or like they use in Shrek, like an onion. They are layered. The idea being that you have a layer of traffic, a layer of parks, a layer of weather, a layer of natural, or a layer of features, whatever it is. If you're looking at multiple layers and you can turn them on and off, you're using GIS. You guys use GIS all the time. You just don't know it because we don't really use those features a lot. But whenever you're Googling to go to a place and you put, hey, I want to see what the traffic is, that's GIS. You're using GIS because it's using another layer, layer upon layer upon layer. Far less likely are we to use is something called remote sensing. Remote sensing is satellites above the Earth's surface that are using their information to kind of gain access about the Earth's surface. So they might be trying to find out, hey, where are the trees? They're going to measure carbon dioxide output. Hey, where's the forest fires? They're going to measure heat output. So when you're talking about remote sensing, you're talking about a satellite is trying to sense something on the ground, and that is remote sensing. So those are your three ways that we saw the idea of different types of maps. Question number 9. What is a formal region? This brings us into the questions of regions. Well, there's several regions, so let's start there. What is well, let's go even further back. We're going to go all the way back. Hold on, Mr. Swain needs to drink iced tea here. Hold on. All right, so a place is something we've talked about all year. Our sense of place, our National Geographic Traveler sense of place, which we're no longer allowed to read. Thank you. We talked about a place, a sense of place. Everybody has something that's unique. Well, when you have a collection of places that share a characteristic, that is a region. So let's take a place let's take Fairfax County. Fairfax County and Loudoun County and Arlington and Alexandria are a collection of places. They have something in common. They're all in Northern Virginia. That's a region. When a collection of places are around, that's called a region. Now, there are several types of regions. There are formal regions, there are functional regions, and there are vernacular regions. So the first one is a formal region. That is your definitive, there is a start, there is a stop, that is it, bing, bang, boom. The best example of a formal region is a state. It's a collection of places that all have an allegiance to one area. In this case, Virginia. Virginia is a formal region. Virginia's influence starts and stops somewhere. It starts once you get past the Potomac River, and it stops once you get to West Virginia. That's it. That is the idea of a formal region, where something starts and stops. It's a very definitive thing. Some people will put a formal region of where religions are, where languages are, where other forms of culture are, and ethnicity perhaps. That's a formal region. Now, a functional region is where you have a node of power. So I'm going to put my hand up. This is a node, right? It's where it starts. And as you spread out, it gradually goes down. And the best example of a functional region, the radio. When my wife and I are driving up north and we're listening to DC 101, we're next to DC and there's tons of DC 101, tons of DC 101. Then we start getting on the Beltway and we start going up I-95, tons of DC 101, tons of DC 101. Then we start getting Baltimore and DC 101 begins to fade away. As we get further from DC, DC 101 fades away. And we get to the Baltimore Rock Station or whatever, right? Functional regions start and gradually die down as you go because they run into another functional region. Next one is your vernacular region. This is what you perceive to be in your mind. Vernacular regions are regions that if I say the South, which is the best example, and you say the South, are we really talking about the same thing? I might consider Virginia in the South. You're going to say, no way, Mr. Swain, we're not from the South. Well, Virginia fought for the Confederacy. Does that count for the South? Well, yeah, but I mean, we're not like all people who do farming. That's true. That's the characteristic of the South. Vernacular regions persist in our mind, and they are different from person to person. So formal, boom, the most distinct, start and stop. Functional gradually goes, and then there's vernacular, which is all sorts of crazy. And those are your three types of regions. A very good question on that. Next question, number 10. What is possibilism? And the other one that it's opposite of. Oh my gosh, I feel so sorry that you do not remember environmental determinism. Possibilism is the idea that we can overcome our environment. Why do people live in Alaska today? Because we have heat. Why do people live in Las Vegas today? Because we have air conditioning. Why do people live in Florida? Because we have air conditioning. Why do people live in Maine? Because there's heating. These ideas are called possibilism. That possibilism may influence you in a way, but the environment can be overcome. That we have the ability to overcome the environment. Environmental determinism says environment not just sets limits. That was a missed question. Environments cause development. Why does Mr. Swain talk so fast? Because I'm from New York and it's very cold up there, and we don't want to talk very slow because we want to talk very, very fast because we want to get out of the cold because it's always cold. Why do Southerners talk with a long drawl outside? Well, because they are outside all the time enjoying the weather, so they can just talk till their heart's content. Pretty good Southern accent. Why are North Dakota people so smart at math? Because it's so cold up there, they can't do anything but math problems all day. Why are people from the South so good at sports? Because it's so nice outside all the time, they have more time to practice. That is environmental determinism. When you are saying someone is caused by their environment, that is environmental determinism. You are determined by your environment. That is environmental determinism. All right, I'm going to take a break here from the from our other questions to see what we got on the hashtag Swain AP Huge Review. So we're going to take a break from this one for a second. Go to the Swain AP Huge Review. I think they're all from Jessica. What a great woman Jessica is. Question number 1, Jessica asks is, can you explain how the core periphery model, Wallerstein model works? I think I did that already, Jessica. Real quick, the idea that there is a well-developed core somewhere and then a less developed periphery. So the core starts in a country, in a region, and it spreads out. And as you get further away from the core, you are less and less developed. So I think we talked about that already. Then she says, hashtag 2006 FRQ. What would be some advantages and disadvantages of having a call center as a local economic development strategy? Hashtag Swain AP Huge Review. Great question, Jessica. This is from 2006. This caused a lot of issues. A call center is somewhere where you literally are calling up. So if I could do a demonstration here, a call center is where you are going to call up for customer support. Yes, hello, hello, hello. Yes, I'm doing a review session right now. Can I continue this? Okay, hold on. So the call center is when someone is, you are talking with them, whether tech support, whether customer service, whatever, and you're going to an area and you're at a big spot where all these people are calling. It's called a call center. So one of the things you notice is call centers are usually located in less developed areas. Hey, why are you so less developed? Yeah, I'm talking to you. I'm talking to you. Why are you so less developed? Oh, yeah. Really? Okay. She says that she's in a less developed area because they don't have a lot of other options. And oftentimes, call centers need very cheap labor because they don't want to be talking to people all day. Like, do you want to be talking to me all day? You don't want to be talking to me all day. You talk to like tons of people all day, right? Right. So she doesn't want to be talking with people all day long. So it's a very low paying job and they need a lot of workers for that low paying job. So for a long time, Americans in the South, which were typically less well off than their northern counterparts, I'm calling her poor, were not really all that were the ones that were doing the call centers. Today, our call centers are located primarily in India. Great article in National Geographic about a year or two ago that had an article about all the call centers that were setting up in India because it's very, very cheap labor over there and you can get a lot of people in an area that are on a call center. So it's an advantage in the sense that you are getting business to your area. It's also an advantage because you don't have to commute very, very far. It's usually just, in your little town area type of thing. And you're communicating with all people all over the world. The disadvantage, very low skill, low paying job. And usually it's just temporary. A lot of people don't want to be doing that for a long time. Like you don't want to be doing it for a long time. You quit. She quit right now. So that's the idea of the call center in that regard. So good question there from Jessica. Jessica's got another question. Difference between GEM and GDI, hashtag Swain Review. Great question, Jessica. GEM is something we talked about in terms of development. GEM is the Gender Empowerment Measure. GDI, the Gender Development Index. Here's the difference between the two. Human Development Index is something that occurred during our development unit. So what we talked about is that the UN has this whole big formula where they look at gross domestic product, they look at life expectancy, they look at access to healthcare, they look at access to schooling, they look at several different factors, economic, demographic, and social. And so they're going to look at these factors and they are going to do a whole big formula. And what they do is they come up with this number. The higher it is to 1, the better you are as a country. The lower you are, closer to 0, the worse you are. So after I'm going to pull out some old school. You guys ready for this? If I can find it real quick. Oh yeah, here we go. Ready? Bam! TI 83 plus from Mr. Swain back in the day. Oh, yeah. So what they do is they take all their numbers, and what they do is they come up with a number. Closer to 1, the better it is. Norway, best country on earth, 0.96. They got a lot of people that are wealthy. They got a lot of people who are going to school. They got a lot of people who are living a long time, and they got some great stuff going on in Norway. Not so good of a place to live, Afghanistan, like a 0.46. A lot of people dying early because of the war over there. Women don't get educations over in Afghanistan for the most part. Economically, they're not doing very well because of the war zone. Not a good place for you to be. So, Gender Development Index looks at that same number, but adds something different. And what does it add? It adds in there the ability of both men and women to access those resources. So when you're looking at literacy rates, what's your difference between male and female literacy rates? What's your difference between female income and male income? What's your difference between male schooling and female schooling? Gender Development Index looks at the Human Development Index numbers, but looks at it from a men and women perspective of, do you have the ability to access the same amount of income as women do? Schooling that men and women do, all that type of stuff. Gender Development Index. Gender Empowerment Measure, GEM. The Gender Empowerment Measure says, how much do your women in your country have a role deciding things? Because when women are in positions of executive leadership, They can provide things like healthcare through their company. That means they have schooling. That means they have a degree. That means they're making more money. Women who are politicians are making more money and having more schooling and maybe living longer. Gender empowerment measure is the number of or the access that women have to power-making, decision-making abilities in your country. That could be political in terms of an elected leader. That could be CEO in terms of executive decisions. So all those things are good examples when you are talking about the gender empowerment measure. Gender development index. Do you have equal men and women accessing resources? Gender empowerment measure. Do you have women in decision-making power? Gender empowerment measure, as you can guess, is always going to be lower than your gender development index because the vast majority of countries, even the best countries on earth in terms of gender, do not have a lot of equality going on there. There's gender inequality in all countries of the world. So that is it. And Jessica's last one here is, because she says, last one, I promise, could you go over the different types of boundaries, antecedent, subsequent, relic, etc.? Absolutely. So our quick boundaries, jumping to Unit 8, we have several boundaries that we should be aware of. The first is something called the antecedent boundary, or boundaries that are drawn before human settlement. These are usually natural boundaries. Hey, our boundary is that river over there. Hey, our boundary is that mountain over there. So when you're talking about antecedent boundaries, they are boundaries that were drawn before human settlement. Now, our next boundary is subsequent boundaries, which are boundaries that are drawn after human settlement or subsequent to human settlement. There are several types of subsequent boundaries. The first one you should be aware of is the consequent boundary, or boundaries that are drawn as a consequence of a difference. So you're drawing a boundary to accommodate for differences. Why is there a boundary between Northern Ireland and Ireland? To accommodate the differences in religion between the Protestant Northern Ireland and the Irish Catholic rest of Ireland. So that is your subsequent, your consequent boundaries. Our next type of boundary is a superimposed boundary. And this is the worst type of boundary because this is a boundary that is just, boom, drawn on top, doesn't look at differences, doesn't care about differences, says, this is your border, stop talking to me. Well, what about the fact that you just combined two different religions that were at war with each other for centuries? Oh, well, what about, well, your ethnicities here are completely different. Oh, well, too bad. That idea of dividing boundaries, not caring about it, is superimposed. Relic boundaries are last of a boundary, and those are boundaries that are old and that used to be boundaries but no longer exist. For example, Berlin Wall, boundary that doesn't exist anymore. Hadrian's Wall, boundary that marked the extent of Roman Empire. We don't have a Roman Empire anymore. It doesn't count. Great Wall of China, China's boundaries go beyond even the Great Wall of China. So those are relic boundaries. Those are the questions from Jessica with the hashtag Swain AP Huge Review. If you want to ask questions on Twitter with the Swain AP Huge Review, please feel free to do so. Back to our Google Docs here. We are on question number 11. Could you go over the basic parts of religion and the language trees? Yes, I will not draw one because Mr. Greiner, if I draw one, will cause major problems to me and revoke my high school diploma. So I will instead go over it just via words. There are several types of the language tree and the religion tree. The first is the idea that all of these have a trunk. Think of it like a tree. It's a trunk. They all started from this trunk. Your branches and limbs outside of your house right now on those trees all started as that trunk. That's the language and religion. Let's talk about religion because that's the easier of the two. If we look at the religion tree, let's look at the Christianity tree. Everybody who is a Christian has similar beliefs. There's a similar system of beliefs. The belief is Jesus, not to get all religious here, Jesus, of course, is the Son of God and was the second coming of God. Boom. Can't really be a Christian without that belief. If you are, that's not good. So everyone has that idea. You believe in one God. Boom, there you go. That's that trunk. Where you have different branches, I feel like I'm doing the YMCA. When you're doing those different branches, that's where there starts to be some difference. Roman Catholics believe different than Protestants. Protestants believe different than Eastern Orthodox. They're similar in their belief of Jesus, but how to get to heaven, that's a little bit different. Protestants do some good deeds, have some faith, or have some faith, basically. Catholics, you got to do some good work to get there too. No one just gets a free ride in there. Eastern Orthodox, you got to be a little bit stricter than that. So there's different branches of there, okay? Different limbs, different branches. Off of those different branches, you then have those little twigs over there, and those are groups. And that's when you have little tiny differences. So Roman Catholic, for example, may have a Orthodox and a more of a Reformed or more of a liberal, if you will. Protestant has a lot of different little tiny branches. They have Lutheran, they have Episcopalian, they have Methodist, Mormon. There's all sorts of different branches in there. And then you finally get to the religion of your choice. They all have similar beginnings, but they differ on how you get there. As you get further up the branch, the differences get more and more minor, but they're still there. There's just a little bit of differences. Languages work the same way. Indo-European was our language. Now, you cannot go up to your guidance counselor next year and say, Mr. Swain said I can take the Indo-European language. Who teaches Indo-European language here? You can't do that. There's no such language we know today as Indo-European. But all of the languages of Europe, America, were all at one point traced back to one language called Indo-European. As you moved up and as people spread out, they stopped hearing that perfect speak. Remember we talked about that. Your parents today that were born in the South, when they go down and see grandma and grandpa, they sometimes get their language in there again. And why do they get their language there again? Because that's what they heard when they were young. But as they moved away, they heard that less and less, and their accent went away. That's why when I go back to New York, I say, yo, Uncle Tony, how you doing, huh? Once I get away from that, though, I go back to speaking like a normal human being and not like someone from New York. What happens is once you get away from that, you start to develop your own words, your own way of pronunciation, your own sentence structure, and that eventually moves and becomes a brand new language. So for Indo-European, we have the Germanic branch, we have the Italic or Latin branch, we have the Slavic branch, we have the Indic branch. We kind of move all over the place. Once we spread out from our initial areas, we go all over the place. Our language of English started with Indo-European, then it went to Germanic, then it went to West Germanic, and then it went to, of course, English. The Latin started off with Indo-European, and then went to Latin. And remember, the Roman Empire was united. Everyone spoke Latin, everyone spoke Latin. But when the Roman Empire broke up and everyone was isolated, and you had some people over here and some people over here and some people over here, they each began to speak their own languages. They didn't hear that perfect Latin anymore. So it became disheveled and it became all messy. And eventually they had new words because they knew animals and new things and new plants. So they developed new words for it. And then they pronounced it differently. Then they even started doing things a little bit differently with their grammar. And that then became a new language. And then they became a new language. And they became a new language. Now, in terms of Latin, French, Italian, Spanish, all very close, but there's differences because of where they were isolated. Now, in isolated language, is not the same as a language that is just developing kind of on its own. An isolated language is a language that has no tree. Think of it like a weed. It's a weed in the middle. Ow. It's a weed in the middle of the garden that just is growing up. So you have all these trees and you have this tiny little weed thing sticking out that's not connected to anything. Now, English, the most spoken language in the world by far. There are more speakers of English worldwide in size than any other language. But if you want to do person for person, Mandarin is the number one, and they are from the Sino-Tibetan family. So that was a good question. Hopefully that got you the answer that you were looking for on that one. Question number 12, can you go over the characteristics of each stage of the demographic transition model? I think I did this, but I'm going to go over it again. Because it's always important to go over demographic transition model. Stage 1, that's uno, if you sprechen die Deutsch. Stage number 1, of course, is your high birth rates and your high death rates, and they are fluctuating. They're going up and down, up and down, up and down, like a fish. And then in stage 2, your birth rates stay the same because you got to have a lot of kids because some of them might not live. Then in stage 2, the death rates start to go down. Why do the death rates go down? Because Mr. Ponce just texted me. Because because there is a medical revolution that is going on that drops that death rate, that there are advances in medical technology and so on and so forth. Then in stage 2, boom, your natural increase rate, your total population shoots up like a rocket. Stage 3, your death rates continue to drop. Your birth rates now start to drop as well because now you're moving to the city. You don't have room for kids anymore. You don't need 5 kids to work on the farm. You only need maybe 3. Then, stage 3, your birth rates start to drop. Your death rates continue to drop. Stage 4, you went from high birth and death in stage 1 to stage 4, low birth, low death, and a low natural increase rate because women are now valued members of society. They work. They go to college. They don't want to have as many kids or any kids, or they want to delay kids, which means instead of having 4 kids, they'll have 2. Instead of 3, they'll have 1. And that is going to make those birth rates low. Then you have a stage 5 where your birth rates are kind of fluctuating a little bit, and every once in a while, you might have more death rates than birth rates, and your total population may even start to drop off a little bit. So those are your demographic stages of the transition model. Very, very good question. Number 13, lucky number 13. What were the agricultural revolutions? Good question. Agricultural revolution starts off with the following. We have the first agricultural revolution that occurs during Neolithic times. That's the very idea of, hey, plant, water, wow, crop, that's great. Hey, you, cow, help me. That is your first idea of the Neolithic first agricultural revolution. Then it worked that way for a long time. There wasn't much change that went on after that. Finally, you had in stage 2, in the second agricultural revolution, that's when you had the idea of shifting cultivation, where, hey, we shouldn't grow all of this all the time. We should let this fallow for a little bit. Hey, let's use fertilizer to grow things. Hey, let's use machinery, very simple tools and whatnot. That's your second agricultural revolution. Your third then things like that stayed the same for a couple hundred years. And then we had the bio-revolution or the green revolution, in which people were using technology, genetics to modify food, to make food that you grow bigger and better, and you make it more consumer friendly as well. The seedless watermelons, the square watermelons, the double corn cropping, the double side ears of corn, the jumbo eggs, all of those types of things are genetically modified, and that happened during the third agricultural revolution? So another good question. All right, question number 14. Acculturation, assimilation, agglomeration, deglomeration, 14 and 15. Acculturation and assimilation sound like they should be different, but they're actually a little, it sounds like they should be the same, but they're actually different. Here's the difference is, acculturation is when a culture takes certain aspects of another culture and embraces it and uses it in their own. Assimilation is when you literally just see one culture disappear into another. So acculturation is kind of like, hey, I kind of like what these people are doing, so okay, I'll interact with them. I'll take a little bit of what they're doing, and then I'll do my own thing. Assimilation is, wow, these people are kind of cool. And then all of a sudden, this person's independence becomes gone, and you just have a bigger group over here. Assimilation is when individual identities are lost. Acculturation is when you're kind of taking different groups or different characteristics of each. Agglomeration and deglomeration. Agglomeration and deglomeration go back to industry. Agglomeration is the idea that you are using in agglomeration the bringing together of sectors. So for example, we talked about it already when we talked about airport, right? Near an airport, you're going to have things that cater to airport services, like maybe car rental places, like hotels, like big UPS hubs. That's agglomeration. When you have businesses that are alike and they are around one another, that's agglomeration. So near a university, you're probably going to have a bar. You're probably going to have a hotel. You're probably going to have restaurants. That just makes sense because people want to eat out. They want to drink differently. They want to have their parents stay at the hotel. That's agglomeration. When things are alike and around one another, that's agglomeration. Deglomeration is when things you think are alike but are not really alike. On Long Island, for example, with agglomeration, for whatever reason, I don't know why, there's an agglomeration of nail salons, pizza places, and bagel places. They're all the same. You can't go to one without there being those three in one kind of shopping center strip mall area. Deglomeration is when you think things work together but really don't. So, for example, let's say you have a grocery store. Right next door to the grocery store, what's there but a funeral home? What? I'm going to get my groceries and then I'm going to go to my friend's funeral? No, that doesn't make any sense. That's deglomeration. When one business or both businesses go out of business because or move because they are not properly matched. A jewelry store and a theft prevention services store, really not going to be a good match for one another. A pizza store and another pizza store. Yeah, they're both selling pizza, but they're taken from business. That's no good. That's deglomeration as well. So deglomeration, when businesses don't work out well and one leaves another area or they both go bankrupt, goes into industry. Not good. Question number 16, do we know about the dependency theory or the gravity model? Dependency theory, I think you're talking about dependency ratio in the idea of you have stage 2 countries have more older people, more younger people and less older people, and stage 4 has more older people and less younger people. You also could be talking about the dependency theory in that less developed countries depend on more developed countries. There you go, dependency theory. The other question that you had was the gravity model. Gravity model is always good to know because you can apply it in a lot of different ways. Gravity model, if you think about, we'll bring back this again, and oh yeah, here we go. This is good. So if you think about the gravity model, here we have our gravity model. Think about this back to physics. You guys are a bunch of physics folks. I sign enough physics field trips. Here's your one planet. Here's your other planet. They're, of course, roughly the same size. Now, the idea behind the gravity model is the closer these two get together, the more influence they're going to have. The further apart they get, the less influence they will have. Now let's pretend this is Grandma A and this is Grandma B. You live right here. So pretend my forehead is where you live. Well, Grandma B decides to move closer to you, and Grandma A moves down to Florida. Which grandmother are you going to be more influenced and closer with? Grandma B that lives 2 blocks away, or Grandma A who lives in Florida? Grandma B, of course. That's the gravity model. Gravity model, the idea that whatever is closer and bigger to you, you are going to be more influenced by. You can apply it to globalization. You can apply it to cities. We are more influenced by DC because it's bigger and closer than we are Richmond. In Fredericksburg, they are more influenced by us because they are slightly closer to us and we are bigger than Richmond is. As you get closer away from Fredericksburg towards Richmond, Richmond will be a little bit closer. Even though DC is a little bit bigger, people will go more towards Richmond. That is the gravity model. Always good to know, kind of something to think about in that regard. Number 7, time-space compression, or 17, time-space compression. What is that? The idea that the world is getting smaller. The idea that our ability to communicate has increased. The time it takes to communicate has increased, and that means the space has gotten much smaller. We can get, think about it this way, folks. I was just in Kansas City 2 weeks ago. I woke up in Kansas City at 5 o'clock. And then I was back in my room at West Springfield at 12:55. Whoa. That's time-space compression. The idea that we are more connected than we have ever been. The idea that we can get from one place to another place in a much shorter time, communicate much faster. That has shrunken the time-space prism and its time-space compression. All right, we have another question here. Number 18, what do we need to learn? What did we learn about Nepal and its borders? Nepal and its borders are very kind of flexible. In the sense that you have countries in Ponce again, that you have countries that are close to its border that sometimes they get overtaken, but they're also isolated by the mountains as well. So it kind of limits some of their limits some of their information. Those are 18 questions from the Google Docs. They are, let's see, 4 or 5 questions, courtesy of Jessica from the Swain AP HuGe review. And I did not even check the YouTube's machine to see what the quote, if anybody had any question there. Let's see if we got anybody on here with the questions real quick. I don't know if there are, but you never do know. So let's see if anybody's got any questions. Great questions from many of you today. Really appreciate all the questions that you had. They were super good questions, super appropriate questions. I think we got a lot of information covered there. Mr. St. Thomas is asking a question here. Stand by. What do we learn about Nepal and its borders? Didn't you say that they aren't recognized by neighboring countries? They are not recognized by neighboring countries, Mr. St. Thomas. That is true. Areas like China, for example, try to take over that. I think that's going to be a little bit specific. I don't think you'll have to worry about that too much in that regard. So no worries from that perspective. Just going to see if we have any questions here on the comments. We do not have any questions on the comments here. So we, folks, I believe, are going to shut this bad boy down if there are not any more questions. We were on here for a little over an hour, about an hour and 15 minutes by my count. I certainly hope you guys had a very informative review session. Had a lot of stuff, had a lot of great stuff going on there. Good question, whoever asked those models questions, because it really enabled us to talk about a lot of stuff. A lot of great information. We'll see you tomorrow when we ask some more questions. You can ask more questions. So if you have any more, continue to ask them in preparation for tomorrow. Beyond that, though, we are going to sign this bad boy off. I believe, if I don't say so myself, I was on fire. And I believe this was a gold standard AP review. Hope you found it beneficial. Watch it anytime, on demand. Go to sleep with it. Watch it at the bus stop. Watch it in the hallways. Maybe we'll broadcast it over the loudspeakers. We will catch you tomorrow. Good luck. Study hard. You're all going to do great. I know it. I can feel it. You're all going to do great. And we will catch you down the road. Good night, everybody.